Okay, so this presentation is King in the Green Meme. So I'm going to make the case this time that Dr. King was in the Green Meme. So the Green Meme is a stage in spiral dynamics. So for those who don't know, spiral dynamics is this idea that people and societies progress in stages. The first stage is beige or autistic stage, and this is represented by, on a microscopic scale, by a baby who is chiefly interacting with the world through touch and sensation. On a macroscopic scale, we decide that that is best represented by the hunter-gatherer stage of humanity. The next stage is purple or tribal. This is when a young toddler first learns his family, mama, papa, builds his family connections. It's also deeply centered around spirituality and spirits. So on the macroscopic scale, it is the time of tribes in America or in the world in general, and the idea of spirits that come and infuse us and give us good luck and bad luck. The next stage would be red egocentric. On a microscopic scale, that would be your teenage years, when you'll just go out and live for yourself and not think about how it affects your family. On a macroscopic scale, it is the age of warrior empires like the Romans and the Egyptians and things like that. Blue meme on the individual level would be when you get married and have kids and things and build a family, your own individual nuclear family. On a macroscopic scale, it would be the rise of the Christian church, when there is an ideology that holds people together, and siding onto this credo makes us brothers and united. The next stage is the orange stage, which is geared towards success. So that's when you start your career and try to make a bunch of money, and that is part of that's the microscopic scale. In the macroscopic scale, that would be the time of the rise of capitalism and colonialism. That's the orange meme. And the next meme would be the green meme, and it's centered around love, family, and connections. So on a microscopic scale, that's usually after you retire and you realize you want to build these family connections and this love. And on the macroscopic scale, we say that is the hippie era, quote unquote, when we build these green meme policies and these social safety net policies and things like that. So I'm going to make the case that King's life is centered chiefly around the green meme, which is love, connections, and building a strong social policy to help poor people. So building cross-cultural bridges. So both of his groups, the SCLC and the Poor People Campaign, were integrated. And they were integrated, as I said, because he believed in the idea that man can actually change his circumstances and improve his circumstances, and that people were redeemable, and that there's no reason to exclude anybody, and we are all of us are brothers. And with the SCLC and the Poor People's Campaign, he was able to work with the NAACP, as I said before, which was on his right. He was also able to work with the Peastone Rangers, SNCC, CORE, who were on his left. Okay, it's very important, and very important to realize that. And all those different groups didn't agree. NAACP, as I said before, didn't believe in nonviolent direct action. SNCC, CORE didn't believe that nonviolent direct action was the only way. He was able to pass comprehensive civil rights legislation, chiefly the Voting Rights Act, the end to segregation in interstate travel, and also, I can't think of the third one. But he was chiefly able to work with John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. Now, he did also work with Republicans. He did meet with Eisenhower. But he said the problem with Eisenhower was that because he was a conservative, he wasn't allowed to bring about the sweeping change needed to reform the South. He never wanted to use federal government to overpower the states or fundamentally change how things were. As a conservative, it's important to take the issue, reduce it down to a smaller individual problem or a smaller community problem, and then pluck out the one instance of the problem. Now, if you're more liberal, you can make a sweeping change like the Voting Rights Act that's federally enforced to make sure black people can vote. So that was why King had a hard time working with Eisenhower. But he did work with Eisenhower and other Republicans. King never actually took sides in politics either. He was registered as a Republican because he lived in Georgia and all the Democrats were Dixiecrats. So of course he's going to be a Republican. But he never actually endorsed John F. Kennedy, and before he died, he never endorsed Lyndon Johnson because of the war. So he never actually endorsed a candidate. He did. He was able, as I said, to work with SNCC and CORE and NAACP. So that's enough on cross-cultural bridges. He supported the social safety net. He was definitely for universal basic income, which he talked about ad length. Because he said that the best thing about UBI was that it addressed poverty directly by making people not poor. So UBI should be based off median income, not the amount to barely scrape by. Okay? So since King wasn't a politician, he had to support politicians. And the politician he supported was A. Philip Randolph, the man who started the Brotherhood of Sleeping Call Porters. And he was vice president of the AFL-CIO at the time. And so his initiative had guaranteed work for all Americans, health care, universal health care, UBI for those that could not work, fair housing, living wages, and environmental protections. This was proposed in 1964 by A. Philip Randolph. So this idea that these left-wing policies are crazy or new, no, they're not new. We've been trying to push for this since 1964.
He would be considered to the left of Bernie Sanders today.
Yeah, A. Philip Randolph would be considered to the left of Bernie Sanders. And thank God they didn't kill him for being a communist in 1920, because they were going to kill him for being a communist in 1920. A. Philip Randolph was like a street preacher in Harlem, and he worked for the Communist Party. And so he would just be on the street corner talking about communism. And they were going to beat the crap out of him, the police. But what saved him was he did an exhaustive breakdown of the English occupation of Ireland. And since all the cops were Irish, they were like, wow, he really knows our struggle. So that's how he didn't get his ass whooped.
Wow.
Now, what got him was the federal government cracking down on the New York Communist Party. New York Communist Party, they were so instrumental in the civil rights movement. It's not even funny. They did so much good. It's not, but so A. Philip Randolph was the guy that were going to hang. And so they go to trial, and he's able to prove that he's not actually working with the Russians, and so he lives. And that's when, after that, he starts scaling back his left-wingness, I guess you would phrase it. But he ended up becoming a Democrat, and he was one of the first black Democrats back in the day. He's one of the people that actually got black folks start voting Democrat. Now, the reason black people didn't vote for Democrat back then because unions weren't integrated, and unions worked exhaustively.
What year was this?
This was in the 1920s and 30s. They worked exhaustively to keep black people out of skilled labor jobs. And so black people would cross the line when they did strike because they're like, hey, they won't work, we will. And so there was always this animosity between unions and black people. And A. Philip Randolph always made the case because you can't just totally knock down the idea of unionism when you're chiefly a group of laborers. Even though the unions treat you badly, the idea of unionism is good. And so A. Philip Randolph was doing a lot of great stuff back in the day. So he also supported LBJ's War on Poverty, which did work. There was a study. I want to throw this out there because people try to say the War on Poverty never worked. So poverty rate fell 10% from 1964 to 2012 because a lot of those policies kept up with SNAP, welfare, and things like that. And this was in a Columbia study. And it was the most comprehensive poverty program in U.S. history. Now, one of the things King talked about with poverty programs is that often the reason they didn't work was because they'll be started by a group of liberals, and then when conservatives take over, they destroy the policy. So they never keep it in action long enough for it to work. Also, most poverty programs attack one symptom of poverty instead of attacking poverty directly. So because you're poor, you have poor education. So there'll be an education initiative, which is only one part of one reason for your poverty. Okay? So when the conservatives come in and take it away, they'll say, oh, well, it didn't work. Well, you took it away and it was only one part of it. Or they'll address fair housing. Well, part of the reason you're poor is because your housing sucks and you can't get property value to increase. So they'll work on that for a little while and they'll take that away. So the reason the poverty programs, the ones that didn't work was because we didn't stick with them. Okay? And all this is in the book, Where Do We Go From Here? Which, if you read one book by Dr. King, that would be the book to read. He lays all this stuff out perfectly.
When in his career was that written?
67 it was released. Well, it was supposed to be released in 67. They put a few copies out. It was so radical that they had to pull it back. They were scared. So it was re-released in 77. So if you buy a copy that's old, it's probably from 77. So also families that are poor, so one of the ideas he fought against was this idea that people are poor because they don't want to work or are not capable of handling a job. In 1965, this is from A. Philip Randolph's Freedom Report. In 1965, 20% of poor families had a breadwinner that worked full-time. Another 40% were victims of underemployment or unemployment. So there are people that have had jobs in the past. So this idea that there is just a certain segment of the population that's just incapable is just BS. And they brought back the stats to prove that up. And these stats are from the Labor Department. A. Philip Randolph was AFL-CIO vice president, so he had the data. So this idea, that's one thing I love about King. King pulls up the data. You know what I mean?
Are unions great, you think?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I would say unions, Don Beck and Saeed Malabani say unions are blue-orange because they build a structure. But the way King interacts with the unions, where he has the unions coming on to civil rights marches, which they didn't normally do. And the Memphis campaign is an amazing example of this, because he brings the United Auto Workers in to a Memphis sanitation workers strike with the idea that all workers are in solidarity. There's only a handful of people that could pull something like that off, because the UAW, they're almost like the Cadillac of unions, like especially in 67, especially in 67. So they were seen as the creme de la creme of workers. So for them to come down and help Southern sanitation workers was huge. So the way King interacted with the unions was green mean, but I think unions in and of themselves would be orange. So again, he was anti-war, and if you praise nonviolence and civil rights movement, you can't be for it in Vietnam. We got to cast off this idea of colonialism. And so he understood that the same level of violence they would bring against a protester in Birmingham is the same violence they're bringing against a communist in Vietnam. They're trying to beat these people into submission. And if they can beat them into submission in Vietnam, they'll eventually be able to beat me in submission in Birmingham. So I've got to be for, it's all or nothing. It's all of us in there together. Now, from an orange mean perspective, this is a horrible idea, because you finally got audience with the president. So black people have tried to get audience with the president ever since Theodore Roosevelt. And King was the first one to have a serious audience. And he's going to throw it all away for a bunch of people he's never going to meet that don't know us. Now, it's so good that he did come out publicly against the war, because once he did that, that made it a respectable thing to do. Before that, you had to be a hippie, or you had to be some kind of weird long
Somebody
hair.
was about to be drafted and sent over there.
Yeah, or someone to be drafted. But now, when King's in it, you can be 40 years old and be against the war and be okay and not be looked at crazy. So even though King died, I give King a lot of the credit for stopping the Vietnam War, because once he came out with it, a lot more people could come out like that. And another thing he kept saying was, after I win the Nobel Prize, I can't not speak out against war. Like he
It's a peace
took
prize.
wins. He's not going to lay down on war, no matter what, because he is now one of the people that are fighting for it, fighting for ending war. Another thing he did, he definitely challenged authority. So
That's for sure.
that's for sure. One thing I love about his protest, and I think that integralists should view protest by this criteria of he protested the organizationally directly responsible. So the bus company won't let me sit in the front, so I'm boycotting the bus company, you know? And then like taking over a park, like Zuccotti Park, isn't necessarily the same thing. Because the people that run Zuccotti Park aren't in charge of the economy. So when an integralist is criticizing protest, instead of just saying, oh, they're all green meme and I don't care nothing about them and they're just silly, actually take these points of, well, they're not protesting the actual entity that's in charge of making it better, you know? He always advocated for a specific policy change. And that is something that he learned from the failed campaign in Albany, Georgia. So in Albany, Georgia, they, before Birmingham, after Montgomery, was the Albany campaign in Albany, Georgia. And he had large swaths of people getting arrested. I want to say it was 10 or 15% of the black population got arrested.
Damn.
But nothing got changed because he was trying to integrate the schools, integrate the lunch counters, get jobs for black people. He was doing too much at one time. So from that, he learned when he went to Birmingham to have specific things he was fighting for. So in Birmingham, he wanted to integrate the lunch counters in Birmingham and also get black people hired at the department stores, which were great jobs in the 1960s. You know, you could sell washing machines and send your kid to college back then. So it's huge to advocate for a certain percentage of black people selling at Woolworths. So he asked for very specific things going forward after he learned that from the Albany campaign. He fully accepted and understood the risk he was taking. He never complained about going to jail. He went to jail if he got beat, if he got spit on or whatever. He always took it in stride. And he was smart enough to get a critical mass of people that would force those in authority to listen to him. So I think that if an integralist does want to criticize a protest, criticize it on those criteria, saying that, well, he didn't meet this criteria or that criteria for a successful protest as King did, instead of just blanketly saying, well, protesters are green meme and they're just causing trouble. So, and that's it for the green meme part of Dr. King. I'm actually still working on this. I'm not done with all my research. So I will be adding to this. This is my first shot at it. I have not studied his work with the Center for New Politics yet. So that's the thing I haven't done yet. So if someone's listening to it and they're upset I didn't mention that, I haven't got there yet. All right. So that's it. Thank you for watching. And please donate.